Welcome back, guys, to the Grim Reader. Today we're doing something a little bit different, and everything's going to be different because it's only my second video. But yeah, so last year, 2025, I read 23 different books of all different genres. Some I loved, some not so much, some I would recommend, some maybe not so much. So we'll get into all of that today. But I wanted to go through and do them on a stacked tier list from S tier all the way down to D tier so you know what to read and what not to read and let me know your thoughts along the way as well. I hope you enjoy. So, the way I'm going to do this is we're just going to march along in the same order that I read them last year from January to December. This way, it's kind of unbiased. There's no necessarily particular order to the rank in terms of, which are going to be S tier and which are going to be D tier. So, you'll just have to stick around for the whole video to see what I did read and why I'm positioning where they are. I will give you about a 30-second synopsis of each book that is spoiler free, and then I'll give you my personal opinions of why I'm placing it where I'm placing it. But let's jump right in. We're starting off hot.
The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien.
So yeah, I started the year off with a banger. Sue me. Fellowship of the Ring instantly going to S tier, of course. J.R.R. Tolkien's world building in this is phenomenal. This has always been a movie trilogy I've loved, and I finally did step into the books. This one impressed me. We'll get into books 2 and 3 later. Uh, yeah, no spoilers there. But the Fellowship of the Ring, I talked about this in the last video. It follows Frodo as he goes on his journey from the Shire, a peaceful place, a calm place, where he inherits this ring from his uncle Bilbo and gets tasked with a journey that is far more than ever he expected it to be. Comes across a companion of friends, and that becomes the Fellowship of the Ring. If you haven't read it, definitely do give it a shot. If you're not a reader, feel free to watch the movies too. They are an incredible adaptation. If you haven't seen them already, you should definitely do so. But highly recommend this, and we're starting off with Nest here.
Dune by Frank Herbert.
We're going to be putting this one immediately in S tier as well. If you watch my original video, you'll know that this again is one of the books that got me into reading. Again, started from watching the movies, part one and part two, before I even read the book, and absolutely loved the performances and the movie as a whole, and figured it was time to pick it up. And this was one of the most enjoyable reads I've ever come across. It's a long book for sure, but for me, it completely transported me to the world of Arrakis, and I loved it. It follows Paul Atreides, who's a young nobleman who's kind of, tasked with becoming a leader sooner than he was anticipating, and trying to figure out what that's going to look like for him as he's living on a new planet with new people. And there's a lot of religion and just uh, pressure on him as a whole. But yeah, this is another book where, like I said, it just completely transported me. I loved it. The imagery, the world building, the characters was all so good and set up for an awesome book too, which we'll cover here in a few minutes.
Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
So yeah, this one was recommended me by people I worked with several times actually, and it was one that I jumped into not knowing much about it, but quickly learned that this is a masterpiece on how to negotiate, how to win deals, but more importantly, how to understand people, not just in the workplace, but in life as a whole. Chris Voss is former FBI and is just masterful in his way of telling stories that he has experienced along his journey in the FBI, and now how he trains people to be able to do what he previously did in his former life. It's a super interesting read. It doesn't feel like a business book because of his storytelling and the actual real world examples he gives. I absolutely love this one. This one's going to go in A tier for me.
Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert.
Yeah, so again, Dune Messiah, this one is really hard for me to rate because I could see a world where it's S tier for me, but for the sake of the video and just since I've had time to marinate on it, I do think it's an A tier for me. That doesn't take away from this being an insanely good book. I'm so excited for the movie to come out at the end of this year. I hope Denis Villeneuve takes this to the next level. It starts out very more political drama than the original book. There's a lot less action, but the way that this book closes out moves so fast, but in a great way, and the characters grow so much. You learn even more about the world and kind of what's going on behind the scenes, and I absolutely loved it. So for me, it's an A tier again. Could easily be an S tier, maybe an S tier the more I sit with it. I'm not sure.
Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Atomic Habits is another one that was recommended to me by people at work several times. I know this one is super famous and has changed people's lives, but for me, it didn't do it. I listened to it on audiobook, and I'm not sure if that's what made the difference or not. But I put this one in C tier. Again, it's just kind of a book on how to live your life. But to me, it was almost too simple or too practical to where it wasn't even realistic at some points of just trying to structure your day so much and not really accommodating for the adaptation part of life where something pops up and you can't really follow the routine at least. So, I agree with his message. To me, it got a little bit stale, a little bit repetitive, as some business books can get. But this is a world class book and is considered super highly. Just didn't quite land for me.
Children of Dune by Frank Herbert.
So, yeah, I jumped through the first three books in this six-book series pretty quickly. Dune as a whole is an S tier trilogy. Children of Dune for me was B tier. Still an excellent read. Really, really, really good writing. But I'm not going to lie, a lot of it wasn't necessarily memorable, I guess. When I was reading it, felt like a lot was happening. And now when I think back on it, I can't quite remember what happens. I feel like I can't even really give you the synopsis without spoiling books one and two. But if you enjoy one and two, still definitely do read this, but I'm not going to say it lives up to the hype of those first two. And I'm still really excited to jump into book four, five, and six. But I've heard they get pretty out there, but those will probably be read this year in 2026. And hopefully we'll be talking about those at some point soon. But like I said, this one's B tier for me, but still, a good book as a whole.
Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey.
So this one I actually came across the Amazon Prime show first, just called The Expanse. I liked the first few episodes enough to pick up the book, and the book blew away the show, honestly. So this one's going to go to A tier. This is a sci-fi, but to me, what I loved about it is it felt very thought out and real. Like there was actually, some science behind what the author was writing, and it wasn't just so far out there that it was so unbelievable. The way they talk about, the money systems and having enough fuel to go different places and maybe having to sacrifice certain trips. It didn't have the plot armor of most sci-fi books where they're just like, we can go wherever we want and there's no limitations. This one, there are several limitations. It follows four main characters who I absolutely loved. And a lot happens really quickly early on, and it builds up to book two and three, which I have already read, and ends up being a 9-book series that I have not finished yet. But I am excited to do so. Like I said, this is A tier for sure. I really enjoyed my time with this, and honestly, like I said, it really outdid the show. If you see the show on Prime, I'm not sure I'd give it a watch. Just jump right into the books instead.
Objections by Jeb Blunt.
And we have our first D tier, sadly. Again, one that was recommended to me by people I work with. Jeb Blunt is highly respected in the sales world, especially for entry level sales, which at the time I was working in. Again, I listened to this one on audiobook on my way to work and home from work, and it just didn't quite land for me. Objections, if you know anything about sales without getting too technical, are pretty much always the same, and the way to combat them is also pretty much always the same. So writing a full book on it just seemed a little out there. I can understand if you've never done sales before how this book would be enlightening, but for someone who was doing the job, this didn't really teach me anything new. I didn't feel like, and for me, this one's going to be D tier.
Wool by Hugh Howey.
If you haven't sensed a theme already, I love TV shows that revolve around sci-fi. I love movies that are around sci-fi and fantasy. So Wool for me was just another banger of a show, and I had to pick up the first book. I read this in like 2 or 3 days. I flew through it on Kindle. Again, A tier, absolutely. It's very different from the show. Hugh Howey took some liberties when he wrote the show, and that's created some controversy. So if I were you, I'd go back to the source material. This book was amazing. The first, 100, pages may feel a little bit slow. Trust me, dig through it because the back half of the book flies and covers so much ground and has so much character development and world development and politics and scheming, and it's fascinating. You will love it, I think, 100%. I loved it. Again, this is an A tier for sure.
Casino Royale by Ian Fleming.
This one fell a little flat for me. I'm not gonna lie. It's still a good book, but for me, it's gonna go B tier. I absolutely love the Daniel Craig James Bond movies. The Ian Fleming James Bond books are some of my uncle's favorites. He had been recommending to me for some time, and I read the first one, Casino Royale, because it's a movie I love, and it's super short book and kind of flies through the whole, poker mess that you see in the movie. But it just again, it felt a little flat. I'm not sure if it just wasn't long enough, so it didn't, get into as much detail as maybe I hoped it would. I thought there would be more action, more spy, more, what you think of when you come across James Bond. But for someone who has a James Bond statue and a James Bond Funko Pop, I thought I would love this. And for me, it's B tier, which again, B tier is objectively pretty good. I was just maybe hoping for more.
Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey.
So we already talked about Leviathan Wakes and how much I loved that and put that one in A tier. But for this one, we're going to have to go with C tier. This one is a hefty book, as you can see. The first one, I didn't mind that. This one felt pretty redundant. Yeah, I almost stopped the trilogy here, the original trilogy. Like I said, it's a 9 book series, but this almost made me just completely stop it. At this point, I had already stopped watching the show. Yeah, I don't know. The only real saving grace here was the epilogue. When I got to that part, I was like, oh, I am still intrigued. I did read book 3. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But Caliban's War, it just rehashes a lot of the same things from the first book. And what I loved so much about first book that I talked about was the realism. This one maybe didn't feel quite as realistic. It focused on some more characters that I didn't have any relationship with, and kind of had to learn the new ones while just kind of wanting to spend time with the old ones still, if that makes sense. So, like I said, C tier for this one, slightly disappointing.
Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
Yeah, this is a certified banger. This is S tier. The hype is real. If you haven't already, please go read this before the movie comes out. I'm not kidding. This is a must read if you enjoy the sci fi space. It's the same author who wrote The Martian, which I have not read yet, but it's a movie I loved, and my hopes are super high for the Project Hail Mary movie with Ryan Gosling here in the next couple weeks. Yeah, but this book follows a former science teacher who gets tasked with becoming basically an astronaut on a mission to save the world from burning up by the sun. There is a relationship in here between him and an alien he comes across named Rocky that is awesome. I mean, it is the greatest dialogue I think I've read for a creature who doesn't even speak. Again, once you read the book, you'll figure that out. But it's just a masterclass. There's only a few characters, and all of them are likable except for one. But that's honestly kind of just a compliment to the writing style, where he makes you dislike a character pretty much, and she's not even in the book a ton. Uh, this is a masterclass. It's S tier. Go read it. The movie comes out soon. We're going to talk about this more on the channel here in the next few weeks, so stay tuned.
The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Okay. Um, we might need a moment of silence. I gave The Two Towers C tier. Let me explain why. If you've seen the theatrical version of The Two Towers, you'll probably adore it. If you've watched the extended edition, there's going to be things you don't love. The book is obviously the source material for the extended edition, and there's just too much time spent with certain characters where it really drags the book out. Feels really slow for not even being overly long. This was really disappointing to me. I love the Lord of the Rings movies. I loved the first book. I was excited to jump into this one. It didn't do it for me. So this is a C tier, and I'm not sure I'll read it again, although I probably should. But yeah, that's where we're at.
Red Rising by Pierce Brown.
The cover of this book says one heart pounding ride, and I think that's kind of all the description it needs. This is an S tier. Pierce Brown's first work with Red Rising is a masterpiece. This is sci fi at its finest, with dystopian, with fantasy elements, with Star Wars esque type fighting at different parts. It is so good, and the first 100 pages moves really really quickly to the point where you are so quickly drawn in and just excited to see where it goes, and it goes and goes and goes, and then it kind of stalls, and then it goes again, and you just can't wait to pick up book 2, Golden Sun. Darrow in this book is so cool. It is basically a boy who is part of the Reds, which in their society there's like a colorful structure, where the golds are at the top, the reds are at the bottom, and it's your typical, I guess, chosen one where he's got to work from the bottom to the top against an oppressive government and figure out how to take it down from within. It feels a little bit Hunger Gamesy, but it does a really good job of separating itself from that feeling at the end of the book and being fully unique. I absolutely love this, and once you read this book, I think I can confidently say you're going to want to read book 2 and 3. And it's now going to be a 7 book series. It's a 7 book comes out at the end of this year. I love this. It's an S tier for sure. No questions asked.
The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien.
I really hate to do this, but it's another C tier. This is my favorite movie of the three Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson. It was not my favorite book. This one fell in the middle between Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers, but it is still C tier. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the movies that I didn't even know existed in Middle Earth. And it was a little bit too much, honestly. I kind of, it's one of those things where usually the movie leaves things out that you wish were in it. And this is a movie that leaves things out that I'm really glad it left out because when I was reading it in the book, it just felt dragged out, bogged down. I'm not really sure. A little bit too much detail. I know that's a lot of the things that people love about J.R.R. Tolkien, but for me, just became a little too messy, too detailed, too spending too much time with different characters and different sceneries and places and all these things when it's book three. So to me, it should just be a moving action book, and it's not really that, even though the movie definitely is. You guys may love it. For me, it was C tier, and it again really disappointed me. But that's where I'm at with the Lord of the Rings trilogy when it comes to the books.
John Knox, The Scottish Reformer by Dorothy Martin.
Yeah, so I had never heard of this book. It was recommended to me by my grandfather. I've been to Edinburgh. I've seen the St. Giles Cathedral where John Knox famously used to preach. It's a super short book. I read it in a day. It was interesting, actually. I was surprised. I'm going to give this a B tier. It just kind of gives you his life story and how he became such a big piece of the church in the Europe's Reformation in the 1500s. If you like history, if you've ever been to Scotland, if you have any interest in religion and the history of it, especially Christianity, of course, this would be a good book, I think, for you to pick up. I learned a lot from it.
Jesus, the High Road Leader by John Maxwell and Chris Hodges.
So, John Maxwell and Chris Hodges, both highly respected Christian businessmen. I went through this book with my small group at church. Jesus, the High Road Leader, is very practical, gives great examples of how Jesus led in his time on earth. I gave this a B tier. I thought there were really good things in here to pull away from it, but it's not much more than that. There's 7 or 8 key points, I can't quite remember, that if you are interested in Christian leadership and leadership in your job, it would be a really good book to read. I think it was encouraging, it inspired me, challenged me, and all of these things that you can ask for from a Christian business book.
Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman.
This book is the 20th anniversary edition, so this was released in 2005 or 2006. The book originally was written in 1985, and it still holds up super well today, even 40 years later. I gave this an A tier. I know some of you maybe have read this in school. I did not, but I've heard from some of my friends who did read it in school that at the time they thought it was super boring. Um, I think if you read it now and give it a chance, you'll realize the impact that it is having. In the book, it talks about the upbringing of television and how it was taking away from communication, leading to biases, leading to just people not knowing how to communicate with one another. The thing I came up with it is how social media is doing the exact same thing. We bury our heads in our phones. This actually inspired me to delete all social media, and I haven't missed it at all, and just focus on my relationships with people and how to communicate well and speak in person rather than in a completely virtual world that we're kind of stuck in now. So it is an A tier. I think it's a book that everyone should read and try to at least take something away from it. Like I said, for me, it kind of changed my life and made me put down social media, and it's all for the better, I think.
Golden Sun by Pierce Brown.
Many people consider this the best book out of the original Red Rising trilogy. For me, it was actually my least favorite. We're going to talk about this more on the channel and kind of my thoughts on it. But Golden Sun picks up right where Red Rising left off and just doesn't quite live up to what Red Rising was for me. It's still B tier. It's still a great book. It was interesting. It just took me a little bit longer to read. And I'm wondering if that took away from the experience. It was around the time that I was in a reading slump. I picked this up hoping it would take me out of it, and it really didn't. I did still love to see Darrow, but some of the other characters just weren't really doing it for me. The plot armor is thick on a lot of these people. As weird as it sounds to say, I kind of just wish more people died. I don't really think that's a spoiler. If it is, I'm sorry. But yeah, this one's a B tier. I was expecting a lot more. I know this one has super, super, super high ratings. For me, it was a little bit disappointing. It fell a little bit flat, but it's still a really, really good sci-fi book, and it's a trilogy that if you like sci-fi, you should definitely read and stick with it.
The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, so I read this C.S. Lewis book on Kindle over Thanksgiving break, I believe, last year, and I'm going to give it an A tier. It's a super interesting take on heaven and hell through this kind of fantasy and whimsical fictional story, and it kind of describes the potential journey of after death and what that looks like. He definitely takes some liberties here. I don't think it's all necessarily biblically accurate, but I do think for new Christians or people who are kind of searching for what comes next in life, it's a really beautiful picture of what it can be. There are some quotes in here that are absurdly good and impactful and profound, and C.S. Lewis is just a masterful writer. If you haven't read anything of his, I do think this is a really good starting point. I love this book. It's an A tier.
A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I jumped right back into C.S. Lewis. I'm sorry. I just really enjoyed his writing style in The Great Divorce and figured it was time to keep going with A Grief Observed on Kindle. This one didn't quite do it for me as much as the first book that I had read, but it was still, super good, super profound. And it kind of just talks through how grief affects us all differently. He wrote this as kind of a journal after he lost his life. So it's really just his thoughts and him processing things, which makes for a super interesting read if you're into psychology and how people do deal with hurt. It was pretty eye opening for me. I've never experienced a traumatic life event to that degree. So, kind of seeing how someone goes through it and how they rely on God, but also can get mad at God, and all of these things kind of work together for your own grief journey. And you do really get to just observe C.S. Lewis's grief, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, it's a B tier. Again, if you like C.S. Lewis, definitely do read it. If you haven't read anything, I'm not sure I would seek this out as the first one. It's going to feel a little bit slower, a little bit more boring because it is just a journal, but still a highly interesting read for me. I gave it a B.
Abaddon's Gate by James S. A. Corey.
Yeah, they kind of bounced back with this one. Abaddon's Gate, I'm giving B tier. It is at the lower end of my B tier, but that's just because a lot of my other B tier books I think are super, super good reads. Abaddon's Gate has rejuvenated me and given me trust back in James S.A. Corey. Uh, this one was really good. It felt different finally than the first two did. Like I said, my gripes with the second book, Caliban's War, was that it was a little bit repetitive. This one takes a little bit more risk, branches out a little bit further, and does make some of book two worth it, especially, like I said, the epilogue of book two. You get the payoff here in book three, and it is a good setup for the rest of the series to come. My next one is Sibylla Byrne as book four in the Expanse series, and this inspired me to want to read that as well. So this is another great book. It is a B tier for me, but that's just because the sci-fi genre as a whole is really, really tough competition. But if you like the first two, read this one as well. Just keep going.
Rembrandt is in the Wind. Russ Ramsey.
So I closed out my year with something that I would not normally read. This was recommended to me by my brother, who has been to London and Ireland and Scotland several times, and his wife is an artist, so he's found this love for art that maybe I'm starting to love as well after this book. But Rembrandt is in the Wind is a super interesting, uh, honestly, like a narrative on the lives of very well-known painters and artists, sculptors, and just their stories, kind of in a brief chapter. Every chapter covers a different artist and kind of describes the life that they lived, what inspired them to paint or sculpt or do what they did, and also a lot of the hardships they faced. A lot of these guys are broken people, as you learn throughout the book, but their creative exercises are what brought them joy. Sometimes maybe a little too much joy. Sometimes, maybe it was just an escape from the realities of life. Super interesting read. I gave this a B tier. I thought it was a lot better than I was expecting. There is a second book that I have not read yet. Can't remember the name of it, but I do want to read it because I was impressed by Russ Ramsey's writing style and the historical accuracy of it, and I just learned a lot. So yeah, that closes it out. 2025 was a really good year for me with reading. It was kind of the first year I fully dove into it. 23 books was definitely a record for me at the time. My goal was to read 20, so I did outdo that. Like I said, I loved some of them. I didn't like some of them. I would recommend several of them. There's some I wouldn't recommend. So thank you guys for sticking through the whole video. Let me know if you agree or disagree if you've read some of these books. I've already started my 2026 really hot, so I'm excited to redo this again next year and go through my 2026 books read. But yeah, this was a really fun project for me to kind of relive some of the books that I did read last year and marinate on the impact that they did have on me. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know, like I said, if there's anything you agree or disagree with, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.